I'm sure. I guess
Um,
better not say anything inappropriate since it's being recorded.
oh yeah, and a lot of ninth graders will see this later too. So yeah, and we got all ninth graders in here, and thanks for joining us this morning. We looked briefly at your history, and we're in the education and training career cluster currently. So can you and we got some good questions we're going to get to here in a second, but can you tell us a little bit about how you got into what you're doing? And since these are ninth graders, they may not have any idea what African American Studies even is or the importance of it. And I know you started out in English and then you moved into that. So you can tell us a little bit about your path in that.
So actually, my mother was a teacher, so I'm sure that influenced how I became a teacher. And I used to go to school with her and kind of wanted to be a teacher. My mom also spent a lot of time making sure we understood Black history. So I grew up always studying Black history, even though I didn't go to Black schools. I went to predominantly white schools, as you know. So when I went to college, I went to University of Iowa. And when I went to college, I was going to be a doctor because I watched, can't remember the show I watched, but there was a show on TV. So I wanted to be a medical doctor. Hated it, failed out of chemistry, decided, I'm going to go back to what I enjoyed. So I started taking what we called their Black classes. So at Iowa, I majored in American Studies and minored in African American Studies. And my mother said, what are you going to do with that? And I said, I don't know, I'll figure it out. So when I graduated, I went to Brown and decided I was going to be a teacher like my mom, and did a Master's of Arts in Education and got licensed as a secondary high school English teacher. And so I did that for 3 years, and I coached track and girls basketball. I was terrible at that. And then decided to get a PhD in American Studies again, and focus then again on African American history and culture. So that's kind of how I got into it.
Now, we saw on your Texas State website, and by the way, for those of you watching this later, she is joining us from San Marcos, Texas, director of the African American Studies program at Texas State University. So, exactly especially for any of these kids that may not know, what is African American Studies on a college campus?
That's a good question. So at my last school, African American Studies, so, as you know, I was at Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. I was there for 18 years and directed their African American Studies program. A lot smaller, not a lot of support. Loved my students, though. I had really good students. So, but really the way I saw it, because I crossed between English and history, for me, it was a combination of that. So I do a lot of using readings to talk about culture and people. So when I teach a class, even this semester I taught a class that technically was a history class, but I really, we sit in a circle, we read Richard Wright, and we talk about what Wright is writing about in that time period, and then connect it to what's going on today. So for me,
Mississippian.
What's that?
Mr. Wright is a great Mississippian.
Oh, he is from Mississippi, right? And that's what I taught with Black Boy.
Yeah, he's from Jackson.
Yeah. I forgot. Gosh, I didn't even make that connection. So I taught Malcolm X, which I love. I love teaching Malcolm X. Probably Native Son and Malcolm X are my two favorite books to teach. So for me, African American Studies is cultural literacy about Black people. That's what I'd say.
Okay. Now, to take the next step, what if somebody's going to have this class in college, especially for anybody that's not a minority that watches this later? What is the importance of that? Because you're not training people to be protesters. You're not training people to be activists, but you are training people to be professionals and to be scholars and to be leaders in the community. So why is that degree so important? Are the classes so important?
So I would say I am kind of teaching people to be protesters, right? Like I want them to understand the role of Black people in making America. So when I have white kids in there, which I don't have a lot of white kids, they are mostly Black and brown. I have quite a few. This semester I've only had a handful of Hispanic students. But really it's a way to understand, appreciate the role Black people have played in making American culture. So And for the white kids who are in there, they're always really surprised because, well, the Black kids say this too, that they never learn this in their school. So for everybody, it's learning things. And it's also good for white students to be in there because it's often the only time they're the minority in a classroom.
Yeah.
And so they often will just sit back and listen, and they're really good about, I'm here to learn. And there is this weird thing that happens too, because I've asked my Black kids, do you want white students in here? And sometimes they say no, because for them, it's the only space where they are the main group, where they can sit around and talk. And so it is this complicated experience because on the one hand, I think white people should take these classes so that they can learn about the history, but also for the Black kids, it is this space where they can just be themselves. So
I definitely see both sides of it.
Yep.
I have a couple more I want to get to before I get some of these questions, but obviously dealing with young people here, I hear all the time about, I want to go to LSU like you did. I want to go to this school. As somebody that has been in higher education for 20 plus years, what can students expect to have to go through to be a successful college student?
That's a really good question. The one thing I would say to every student is go to class. We don't care why you're not there. We don't care about your reason. Go to class. And if you didn't do the reading, go to class. And the other thing I would say is your professors don't care why you're not there, and they don't care about why you didn't do the work. It's not like high school where you can turn in all your work at the end. We'll just fail you. And as I say, I'm not really failing you. I'm writing down the grade of the work you did. So you failed yourself. But go to class. That's your only job, is to go to class. So go to class, take good notes, pay attention, make sure your professor knows you, because it does make it a little bit easier to help a student. So I had a student this semester who had an 87%, and he kept bothering me. Can you just give me an A? I'll do some extra work, blah, blah. But he was a really good student. And so it's easy to say, yeah, I'll bump you up a couple of points. And then another student who she didn't go to class a lot. And so, when you're on the border, you stay on the border. So go to class. That's my biggest thing.
Now, for any college major, and you talked a little bit about this, how important do you think it would be for any student, whether they go to HBCU or PWI or even a community college, to take some, at least one course in African-American studies? How important do you think that would be for any young person?
I got to mute myself real quickly because I got to yell at my dogs. Hold on. They're like children. Do you want to tell them what my dogs' names are real quickly?
Lena Horne, Ernie Banks, and what's the other one?
Ralph Ellison.
Ralph Ellison.
But I got another dog. I got a fourth dog.
She names her dogs after famous Black people.
Hank Aaron is my last dog.
Yeah, I've been trying to get her to get Shirley Hemphill, who was on who was the waitress on What's Happening.
Yeah. No.
She won't help me out with that one. So
yeah, I won't help you with Shirley. So okay, so your question was why? I think everyone needs literacy in Black history, Black culture, Black literature, Black studies. I also think too, this is maybe because of the way I teach it, but I don't know if my students would say that I'm nurturing, but I care about them and I care about their success. And so often if you take a Black studies class, it may be the only time you'll have a Black professor.
Yeah, that's true.
And Black professors are really good about kicking behinds as well as telling you, we'll give you the truth, but in a way that I think you'll hear it differently. A lot of white professors aren't willing to kind of, even ones who say that they're liberal aren't real good about, this is what you need to do to be successful. Whereas I think a lot of Black professors will say the things that need to be said. So that's the other.
And I think it is good, even though I'm a different color than anybody in this room, but it is good to have the diversity. But at the same time, it's also good to have people from your own community that have been, have walked in the same shoes every day. Yeah. Now I got one more, then I'm gonna get to theirs.
Okay.
Give me your perspective, because a lot of speakers I have are big time pro HBCU. We have 5 great HBCUs in the state of Mississippi, also some nearby Louisiana and Alabama. and we had some in Tennessee as well. So but all your degrees are from PWIs, and you're at a PWI now. So what would be the pros of a minority student going to a PWI?
I mean, the obvious, which is you'll learn how to get along with white people, since white people are still in control. There tends to be more funding, quite frankly. There's more money, more opportunities for scholarships, more ways to practice being in the real world. I also think, and I don't know if I would have said this, but I feel this more, especially given the world today, but there's also a part of me that says, you know, if you can spend another 4 years in an HBCU and kind of being nurtured and comforted and not having to deal with a lot of racism, you're going to deal with it for the next, 60 years you're alive. Why not isolate yourself? So I see both parts of, I just think too, you should go to the best school you can get into, who'll give you the money. But then you have, who's your, at Jackson State?
Yeah, Jackson State, Alcorn State, Mississippi Valley, and we have 6 teachers here that are Alcorn State alums that have connections. We've had several students go there. We have several students at Jackson State, but we also have one that just graduated from Ole Miss. We have several in the engineering program at Mississippi State. We have a few in nursing down at Southern Miss and Hattiesburg, where I went. We have 2 that just graduated from Tougaloo, which is a private HBCU here in Jackson, and we had one go to Oral Roberts in Tulsa. So I mean, we have them go all over.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would say when you mentioned the private school, the other thing I would say is don't take out a lot of student loans. So go wherever you can take out.
Yeah, now we definitely talk about that, because that's the biggest. And for anybody watching this later, right now, you hear all the student loan forgiveness. The problem with the student loan isn't the amount of the loan; it's the criminal interest rates that do it. And they're preying on first generation college students. They're preying on minority families that have never had anybody go to college, and they know that they want their kids to go, and they're talking them into taking out this money. And it is a racket. It's been going on for years. And I agree with you 100% on that. So everybody in here now, everybody watching this later, try to avoid student loans as much as possible.
And this is one of the downsides of some of the private HBCUs is you have to take out a lot of student loans to go.
Yeah, they're great schools, but they're very expensive, and the costs are going up.
And so go to the community college for 2 years, pay your way through. If it takes you 3 years to get through the community college because you had to work, it's better than.
Yeah, and in Mississippi, we have a community college here that if you have a 20 on the ACT, you get full tuition.
Wow.
So yeah, that's one thing, people talk about Mississippi. One thing Mississippi does a great job of is utilizing our JUCO program.
Okay.
We have 2 great ones that are within driving distance of our school. Yeah. And they focus on transferring out to the 4-year colleges or doing the technical degrees as well. So for everybody watching now and later, the JUCO right now with the climate of the country is a best route for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I do want to get to some of these questions, and we got some really good ones. The first one I wanted to get to this is Julia Williamson. She's one of our better students, and she is asking, how tough is it being a minority woman in the state of Texas?
Do I really have to answer that? I'm just kidding. No, it's interesting. I don't think it's hard. I've definitely had experiences, but so there's this, not really sure how to say this, but being a professor in a college town gives me a little bit of privilege. And so for the most part, I've only been here 2 years, but, being at Texas State, because it dominates the town, and even on campus, they respect what I do a lot. Like I get a lot of support here. And so I've had very few problems. And the few problems I've had some of them are just so bizarre. But anyway, that's a whole nother. So it's not that hard, but I also don't stray from my house very often. I just walk my dogs a lot. The other thing is, and I will say this, I walk my dogs all the time. And so, because I have 4. And so people know me as the dog walking lady. And so it gives me some cover, right? And especially once they know what I do and they see me all the time, but it is weird being here because there aren't a lot of Black people. Like I expected there to be a lot of Black people, but there really aren't. it's a HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution. So about 43% Hispanic and only 11% Black. So
yeah, and I know you guys are close to San Antonio, so that I'm sure that factors into that. I'm sure you guys draw a lot out of that area.
yeah, it's close to Austin too.
No, yeah, it's in between Austin and San Antonio. This is from Jaden Jackson, and he's asking, what is your hardest task as a professor?
Hardest task, probably grading papers.
No, yeah, for anybody that wants to get into higher education, teaching is a lot more complex grading than it is on the high school level.
I'd say grading. But let me say this, I think people don't understand, or students don't understand, that when you're a professor, we don't teach every day, right? So I just teach 2 days a week, Tuesday, Thursday, from my first class is at 11 and my second class is at 12:30, and then I'm done at 1:50. So it looks like I have this wonderful life because I'm only teaching 3 hours twice a week. But I also have all this other stuff, especially because I run this program. So I'm meeting with students all the time and grading. And
yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I hear people say, I want to teach, but I don't want to teach high school. I want to teach college. Yeah. But at these major universities, there's a lot of research that you guys have to do that takes up a lot of time.
Yeah. So yeah, that's true. And then advising and mentoring students. So I do agree that if you want to teach, college is the way to go. Although I taught high school, I love teaching high school. And when I finished my PhD, I was actually going to go back into high school teaching. I think it's a lot different than when I was doing it.
Yeah, we have a couple of teachers here that have PhDs.
Yeah, it's not. I love teaching, so for me, it didn't matter on what level I was doing it. I'm glad I'm here because I think I can be. What is the word? You know, I don't have to watch myself as much as if I was in a high school classroom, right? Like I can cuss, which I love to do. But I really only do it to shock them because they're always really surprised when I start doing it. So yeah, so I think and I'm also at a school where research is more important. So when I was at Austin P, we taught more, whereas research was de-emphasized. So it also depends on where you go. But it is they care about teaching here. So it's a good match for me because I care about teaching as well. So.
This is from Kyle Washington. This is a good one. He said, how did you work your way into becoming a professor? Because I don't think a lot of people understand the process.
Yeah, that's a good question. So most of the time you have to have a PhD. And there are two kinds of doctorates. There's a PhD and an EDD, but I'm not going to get into that. EDDs tend to be for they're professional degrees and tend to be for people in education. They're going to be principals or what have you in public schools. So I had to get a PhD. That took me 7 years. I went to University of Texas. We had to write a big dissertation. I think mine ended up being 350 pages, maybe.
Wow.
Yeah, it took 3 years to do that. And it has to be original research and blah, blah. So did that. And then I thought, well, I'll just go back into public schools. And I was certified from Rhode Island and Virginia. So I called Texas and they were like, yeah, we'll recertify you. We'll give you 1 year. And so I was going to go back to Virginia and I didn't know what I was going to do. And then heard about the job at Austin P and ended up there. So a lot of it's luck. The market is really bad. And so some of it's luck and then some of it's connections.
Yeah, because a lot of these universities now are using more and more adjuncts.
Yep.
And that kills the job market for professors because, like you said, people say, "I want to teach college," but it's going to be at an adjunct or a non-tenured level. Yeah. Starting out, there's fewer and fewer professors because, like you said, you teach twice a week, so more and more people are going to hang on until they're dead.
Exactly.
There's not a lot of retiring. Yeah. Okay. Now this is built on the same thing. This is from Roger Harris, and he's asked, what was the toughest part of that to get to where you are in your career?
That's a really good question too. Some of it is even though the tenure guideline, do they understand what tenure is? So tenure, you usually work a certain number of years and then you get tenure and then they basically can't fire you unless you do something awful.
Unless you cheat or break the law.
Even then, I don't know if you'd get fired.
Wow.
Someone said, I remember asking another professor, he was older, and I said, like, what if he beat up a student? He's like, I don't know.
Well, when I was in college, two guys at Southern Miss stole some money and they got fired, but that's about what it would take.
But I don't know if they were tenured professors.
Yeah, they were, because it was the students protested it. But yeah,
Okay.
because they stole, because they misused funds. It was a lot of money.
Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
that'll probably get you fired. And then, having a relationship with a student will probably get you fired.
Yeah. So as long as you're not doing one of those, yeah, it is a pretty secure gig.
Yeah, then you got to show up and teach your class. And I think for me, okay, so what was the question? The hardest part or the most difficult part?
The hardest part, because you said it took 7 years and you went through all this stuff, and what was the hardest part of that is what he's asking.
Yeah, so the hardest part of getting a job, so the hardest part of probably finishing my PhD program, so I answered both of them. The hardest part of finishing my PhD program, probably writing that dissertation and, hoping it would pass, and because you have a committee of 5 people, so they all have to agree. And then the hardest part, I think, of getting tenure is just some of it is just waiting it out. But I grew up with parents who would say, you got to be twice as good to be equal to white people. And so I wasn't really worried because I knew I had done more than I was expected to do. So my mentality is, if the standards are you have to write 3 articles, then I'll do 4 so that they can't. And I was a good teacher and had done more than they had asked. So I wasn't worried, but that's because I always do more than I'm supposed to.
Yeah, and I'm glad you talked about that, because one thing I've always said, and I say this all the time, and even though we're in a great school district and a great school here, I always say it's tougher to be Black in America than people realize.
Yeah.
And it's not fair and it's not right, but at the end of the day, we all know it's true.
Yeah.
So what is, because and I'm not speaking on anybody in here. I'm talking about the whole generation as a whole, but that they are part of this generation. Because I hear a lot of that's too hard, I'm not going to do it. What doors are going to be closed for these young people if they have that attitude now when they're in 9th grade?
I think a lot of doors. I was talking to a friend of mine. I'm trying to, and anyway, this was going to sound really obnoxious. I'm trying to sell one of my houses, but I was talking to my realtor friend, and he said, how is it that you get away with so much? And I told him, I said, it's because I'm really good at what I do. And so because I'm a good teacher, they sort of let me, and I mean, I'm not doing anything like wrong, but I can be short with people. If I think that I haven't been treated well, I will tell them I'm not treated well. But I think, I mean, it's that model about being twice as good to be equal to white people that, there's still things that happen, but at least I have in front of me that I did a lot more than they did. And it's happened, we could talk about what happened at Austin P, but there were certainly instances at Austin P where I was doing a lot more than white people and they were the ones getting the credit. And so I just waited my time until a better job came up. And in many ways, I'm the one who got the last laugh because they're still there. So,
Now,
so my stuff. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about them.
And even if these people, even if no one here wants to be a college professor, how important are these communication skills that you're teaching in your classes? Like, because the one thing I've noticed for years is that students aren't taking communication and writing seriously. How important is that to advance throughout a education and a career?
Yeah, you got to be able to speak. My student, we talk about this all the time, the code switching. You can talk jive, as they call it when I was growing up. You can talk however you want to talk, but you need to be able to speak standard English when you're applying for the job, when you're working at the job. Is it Key and Peele or one of those skits who talk about the white voice?
Yeah.
But truth of the matter is, we talk to our parents differently than we talk to our pastor, differently than we talk to our principal. Like, we're all code switching, regardless of what color you are. We all do this.
Oh, absolutely.
And then you need to be able to write well. You can't write like you're sending a text message all the time. And I let my students text me partially because I'm terrible at checking email. And so if they send me a text message and it's, the thing they would send to their friends, I don't respond. And I tell them I'm not responding. Or I'll respond back and say, you need to remember who you're sending this to, please resend. And so then they will. But you're not going to get that all the time, right? Which is another advantage of taking a Black professor who can say to you, this is what you need to do, and you have to code switch in the same way. Everybody code switches, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Guilty.
Yeah.
But you're right. It is, and I've said this a ton of times too. It's very important to realize, you can have fun, with your family, fun with your friends, but the professionalism that you exude with or without a college education is a key to so much, especially being a female. But no matter what color you are, I've seen white people and black people not get jobs because they went into an interview and didn't know how to talk.
Yeah, and dress appropriately.
Yeah.
In spite of the fact I'm not dressed appropriately, but I'm also on summer break.
Oh, y'all are already out. Well, congratulations. Well, we started a month late. We just got a few more weeks. And I know we're almost out of time, and I appreciate you doing this, and it's always great to see you. But even though you grew up in Illinois, you still grew up, but I won't tell them your age, but you're older than me, so you grew up during there was still a lot of segregation going on when you grew up, and now now you're one of the top African-American professors in the country. I know you're humble enough to where you won't say that, but it's obviously what you've done. So as somebody that grew up in a much rougher time, and even though you are from Molina, Illinois, what have you done that has made you so successful that maybe they could take a cue from?
That's just a really good question. I think one of the things I was lucky because, and I'm realizing this now, which I didn't at the time realize, but I grew up with both of my parents, and I had a grandmother who really pushed us. And I think because my mom was a teacher, she understood how education worked and understood the value of education. And so that was really helpful. The other advice I would give is listen to people you admire. One of the ways I've been able to be successful is just listening to older people and asking them. So I ask my students, I mean, you may know this. So when I teach my classes, I ask a question of the day. And so the last class, I always let them ask me a question. And so, they were asking kind of silly things, but I said to them at the end, I said, you should have asked me like money skills, how to manage my money. And instead you want to know silly things like, I can't, anyway. But I think ask people questions, like ask someone who has money, how did you, and I'm talking about someone who earned their money, not someone who inherited money. How was it that you were able to do this? Can you give me a tip when I'm ready to buy a house? And when you're able to buy a house, buy property. Like that's where money is. Don't buy the fancy car because you think it'll impress your friends. Buy the Honda Civic and drive it until the wheels fall off. Like, things like, and so I think learning about money from my father, learning about education from my mother, learning about my grandma. So my grandma grew up in Davenport, Iowa. So, she had to deal with a lot of stuff. But learning from older people would be, I'd say, how I manage. And then really just believing in education. And then studying and going to class, because what else did I have to do but study and go to class?
Yeah, and
having kids. I think the other thing is not having any kids made it easier to.
Oh, I'm with you on that. They asked me why I don't have any kids, and I'm with you. I like my money and I like my freedom.
I always just say I don't like children.
Well, you have your fur babies.
I do have my fur babies who don't act right during my Zoom calls. But yeah, I'd say the other thing I'd say is, if you don't want kids, don't have kids. Like, you don't have to have children. Like, I think we live in a culture that says there's something wrong with you, but
absolutely,
you can be.
I agree 100% on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just like with the cars and stuff, don't do things because society makes you think you should. And it goes back to student loans. Don't take out a big student loan because society makes you think you have to go to an Ivy League school.
Yeah.
You need to go.
No, I would disagree with you on that. If you can get to an Ivy League, take out the money to go to an Ivy League.
Okay, yeah, well,
because that'll come back. That'll come back.
Okay, yeah. If you can go to the Ivy League, yeah.
Because I can tell you about connections I've made just having gone to an Ivy League.
Oh, I'm sure.
So I would say, but the car thing, there's no value in a car. No one, you think you're impressing everybody on Instagram. They don't care. Just buy a modest car, pay it off. Don't take out big loan payments. Oh, here's the other thing my dad taught me, and I'm gonna pass this along. When you're buying your car, stretch out your payments so that if you have a month where you can't afford it, you don't have this big payment, but pay it off early. So always pay more. If you get a tax refund, pay it toward that and pay it off early. But at least if you have a month where you you know, you didn't work as many hours, you can still pay for your car. And don't live in an apartment if you're driving a, you know, $50,000 car. You got it all.
Yeah,
So,
and we're focusing more on the financial literacy stuff now. So we're slowly getting there.
yeah, it's the car. I think car payments is what gets people in trouble.
Yeah. Well, we thank you so much for taking some time for us today. Several hundred students are going to see this later, and it's always good stuff. So, hey, well deserved.
Oh, and I work out all the time, so
like a fiend.
You know, I got all this free time. All right. Well, thank you. Anytime you want me to
It's
talk
always
to
a pleasure. I have to get to Texas and see you soon.
All right. Sounds good. I'll talk to you later.
All right, buddy. See you later.
Bye.